You're listening to a podcast from thespoilist.com. Welcome to First Contact, a podcast that'll take your head off. I'm Andrew.
I'm James.
And I'm Alex.
This time, we are watching Time's Arrow, Part 1 and 2. They first aired on June 15th, 1992 and September 21st, 1992. The story was by Joe Minoski, the teleplay was by Joe Minoski and Michael Piller for Part 1 and Jerry Taylor for Part 2. It was directed by Les Landau. James, what happens in this one?
The Enterprise is called back to Earth after someone finds Data's head in a cave while doing an archaeological dig, along with evidence of aliens on Earth some 500 years ago. Some cellular fossils lead them to Devidia II, the best Devidia, where Data gets stuck through a time hole and arrives in San Francisco in 1893. There, he tries to track down the aliens, claiming to be a Frenchman and winning money playing poker. And what's a trip to the past without encountering a famous person? Look, everyone, it's Samuel Clemens, and he's friends with Guinan. Back on the Enterprise, the crew plan a holiday to the past, and Guinan tells Picard he better go, or they might never meet. So Worf gets sent packing, and everyone else goes back in time for a fun romp. But will they catch the aliens? Will they find Data? Will something interesting happen with Guinan? And can Data get his head back on? Yes, yes, no, yes.
Well, Alex, you'd never seen this episode before. What did you make of it? It's the Season 5 finale and the starter to Season 6. Like everyone, we're in Season 6, and you said we never would.
Yeah, I mean, these cross-series finales, we've had the dramatic with, say, the best of both worlds. We've had the mind-numbingly tedious with all that Klingon stuff. And then there's this, which there's nothing wrong with it, but it's bizarrely inconsequential, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's fun. It's fun. It's just, to me, it's an odd choice for a finale, but maybe that's the element of watching the end of the season and the start of the season. It's an odd one to have everything hanging on to then come back on another season, to me, anyway.
No, I think you hit upon something that charms with the general audience. I think me and Andrew are probably outliers in that we do actually quite like Time's Arrow. But I do acknowledge that it's a fun romp when you probably want something more interesting, more consequential at the end of a season, when it kind of puts all its cards on the table in part 1.
In your modern day Doctor Who series, this is your episode 3 celebrity historical romp, or at a push, your episode 10 celebrity historical romp.
I think there's an element of it to me as well, that it promises to be something greater in the opening kind of 15-20 minutes. You kind of explore Data's character and it teases all that, and that's just completely dropped once they actually get into what the whole story turns out to be about.
Yeah, so that starting it with, here's Data's head, something terrible has happened to Data, definitely starts it with much bigger stakes that drain away pretty quickly.
More than that, I think it actually is just a massively unbalanced two-parter. I was stunned because this is up there. I like Time's Arrow a lot. I am a big Time's Arrow fanboy. I think it's certainly more fun than other two-parters, and I rank it higher than the big torture one that everyone loves. But I was stunned on this watch at how front heavy it is and how all the air goes out of the room in part 2 really stand up. I think the first one, okay, you've got Data's head, the intrigue there. You've got time travel. Oh, that's kind of exciting. I like time travel. That whole idea of, oh, is he mortal, and this is comforting to Data, and then it's just like, well, we shouldn't sort of just then let this happen. We should, yeah, no, let's just go ahead with the thing that will definitely blow off my head. Okay, fine, well, if you say so. Yeah, they kind of go through the motions a bit, but I like the stuff with Data back in time, and I know why it's a two-parter, because actually the scale of it out on the back lot, lots of costumes, some actual kind of outdoor shooting. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but like, it's not about anything really. Like we say of the best Star Trek, it is very light, it is very fluffy, but it's also, I would say, once you get to part 2, not as fun as you want it to be,
No.
and not as interesting for an ensemble as you want it to be. There's so much intrigue. The stuff with Picard and Guinan in part 1, oh, you better go, or we might never meet. And you think that's going to be setting up some kind of profound experience in part 2? And I don't really feel they have the moment that you want them to have.
One thing coming off the back of our last recording, I do think that this episode is sort of very much the inverse of The Inner Light, where the Inner Light we had, that story focusing on one character, and we talked about how it would be so much worse to have all of the crew in that alternate reality simulation, whatever you want to refer to it as. I mean, this episode is actually doing that. It's putting all of the crew into the historical setting, and it's, as a result, it's having that sort of bouncy play off each other, even when it's just Data on his own, the sort of light-hearted, bouncy interactions with the guest cast. But I do think that there is an inverse that happens where, for having that more jovial, bouncy, fluff almost type episode, you do lose out somewhat on the story.
I mean, it's kind of on a harding to nothing coming up after Iborg and The Inner Light.
Yeah.
But I guess you need to play with that different tone in that case. And I agree. I think as a kind of Data, fish out of water, stuck in the past character piece, fun. That's interesting. His interactions with the bellboy, who happens to be Jack London for some reason, fine. Him hunting for Guinan, him pretending to be building the engine, Samuel Clemens being suspicious and investigating him. Great. This is nice stuff. Then the stuff on the Enterprise, it feels like spinning plates a little bit. Oh, we've found this, so we have to go to this other planet, and we can't just travel back in time through the cave, and then we have to go in. And for TNG, which I think generally stands up, I do feel in this episode the effects are a little bit ropey. Very much some black lights and some puppets.
I was getting very heavy Doctor Who, the TV movie vibes with that snake. I was getting strong flashbacks of the Goo Master.
And they didn't do the best job to hide stunt drivers.
What?
Did you notice when Data was meant to be riding the horse and carriage?
Who's that man?
The man who for some reason has Data makeup on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit TOS in that respect, but it actually, it does have a bit of an original series vibe. And there's obviously references there, like the homeless man who gets killed is that feels very much like City on the Edge of Forever, a time travel episode that actually has weight and consequence. But the whole, they're going back in time to kill vulnerable people in the past, it does feel, it is very Doctor Who as a concept, really.
But in Doctor Who, they would play more on that idea. I mean, it's not something of real consequence in time's era.
No, it's inconsequential. But the sort of aspect of the celebrity historical is very Doctor Who. I mean, the way that the celebrity historical is used is perhaps less modern Doctor Who and more sort of time lash. But there is definitely an element that, I mean, even the time period, admittedly not so much in America, but time period, if you were shifting it over to England, it's all sort of in that realm, isn't it?
Jerry Harden giving a big performance as Samuel Clemens here, but I like that. I'm all for the big stagey period piece kind of drama. That is all good. Like I say, I think that is all good. I think all of part one is fairly entertaining. I think all the stuff in the TNG era is just kind of, I don't know, it just feels a little bit weak. It's a lot of standing in caves and talking about phase discriminations, and it's just like, get to the past so we can do the fun stuff.
Well, there is that, but also, and I think that this is a reason why some people don't like it so much, is you think it's going to be a more introspective story about Data trying to be more human, Data facing his mortality. And then after 20 minutes, we never hear about that again. Not even like a line at the end, I don't remember. Even something about him reflecting on the fact that he's learned about mortality, how he would face it. It reminds me of a future two-parter of TNG, Birthright, where that teases the same thing with Data. It gives us a Data storyline and then doesn't follow through. It just becomes boring Klingon nonsense.
And I think, especially when you've got Guinan there, the immortal, I suppose there's something to contrast that with, and there might have been some greater theme that you could have dug into with that, and even the idea of people in the past dying, and does that matter? What is the actual consequence of that? I concur completely. It doesn't massively deliver on the idea, but I guess it's in this episode. Are you really thinking, well, that's Data out of this? It doesn't really manage the cliffhanger, does it?
You want him to learn something based on how he's reacted to his own mortality in the first 20 minutes. In reflection, it feels like it was just padding.
Yeah, it is. It's padding for what is essentially ends up being just a bit of a knockabout romp. I mean, I think you two probably hit the nail on the head when you were talking in our chat off podcast, saying that the thing it kind of reminds you of, partly because of time period, is Back to the Future Part 3, especially coming off the back of the last episode, that shift in tone. It's very much that same thing of, you've kind of got to commit to, well, this is what they're doing, and you take it out the face value of the terms that it's coming at, really.
Yeah, everyone's going to get dressed up and we're all going to have a lovely time. It's sort of the vibe. But yeah, I think in terms of a cliffhanger, as a two-parter, like, the big interesting thing is finding Data's head, right? And then the actual cliffhanger is, oh, they've wandered into some caves.
There's no real threat there, is there?
No.
It's just, I think it's really weak. It's a really weak ending to the season. In those terms, like, if you watch it together, it's kind of but like as an actual cliffhanger, it doesn't really deliver.
I actually think the previous episode is actually probably the better episode to finish the season on. The problem is that the logical coming back in the next episode for the next season would be a retread of what we've already seen with Picard dealing with the aftermath of Best of Both Worlds. So it would end up being a retread. But that's much more the sort of dramatic ending with a consequence at the end of a season, which, even with the cliffhanger here, this can't hope to match. But again, it's what it is. It's a romp, even if it's not apparent at the start of the episode that that's what it is.
I mean, was it always intended to be a romp, or was that something that they just kind of ended up settling on when the story wasn't really properly working out?
Great question. Don't know. apparently Rick Berman and Michael Piller had originally decided not to end the 5th season with a cliffhanger. But because Deep Space Nine was getting so much attention because it was about to launch, they wanted to make sure people understood that the show was coming back. So,
Right.
yeah, it's a kind of late in the day decision, I guess, but they knew they wanted to have a time travel element, and I think they knew they wanted to use Guinan in some way. What do you think of that? Like this use of Guinan in the past, where she is alive and younger in the kind of present day of Earth. Does that work? Does that make sense? Do you think? Like we don't know much about her past at this point.
I mean, in terms of actors, it makes absolutely no sense with what we've now had with Picard in terms of time frame. But yeah, I've no issue with the usage here. It's more of a structural thing, to be honest. Is that it kind of feels like part 2 is unnecessary. The Guinan's role in it does not need to be that large, but more of a feature of the story that we have with Data in part 1. I don't know that the story gains that much from anything that happens in part 2.
Well, part 2 was really just they'd kind of written themselves into a corner in that they'd set up a load of things and they were like, okay, how do we make sure we pay off each of these things that we've set up? And it kind of ends up feeling like just kind of ticking things off a list.
Yeah.
And it's the way that it starts. I guess, like, I feel like you've missed out on all the good stuff. You've got Riker dressed as a policeman, and you've got Crusher going around the hospital. They're set up as an acting troupe staying in this boarding house, and they're not paying, and that kind of stuff seems fun. And you're just like, well, actually, I probably would have liked to have seen you arriving and coping and getting to that place. And I get you don't really have the time. You've already done that with Data, but it just feels like when the next season starts, it's just like, oh, okay, like we're just sort of starting in the middle of a different episode, and you kind of could have done that anyway. It feels slightly unsatisfying in that way, that the fun stuff is almost implied, and you don't really get to enjoy it so much. And I do quite like that kind of thing, but you almost like, oh, I want to see them playing in the street. I want to see them busking. I want to actually really see them as these space weirdos being completely out of their depth, because it's almost a cheat putting them in a period piece, because this crew would be so weird in contemporary Earth. It wouldn't make any sense for them. And I know you've done that in Star Trek 4 very recently in these terms. Well, not too recently, but recently enough. So, but by putting them in another period, they almost fit in better in the 19th century than they would in the 20th or late 20th century, because they both feel like they're period characters in different ways.
They're there for how long are they actually there for before episode 2 starts? Because they spend a long time and they don't bump into Data. You would think they'd go around and say, have you seen a man with funny face paint?
It does feel like they've been there a while, but I can't tell you if it's a week or if it's 3 months or what it is. It's unclear.
I mean, maybe we're also sort of thinking slightly of the Red Dwarf novels, with being stuck on the backwards Earth and being there for a while. Not consciously, but certainly that's sort of playing in my mind. Anytime you have this sort of, we have to settle in this unfamiliar version of Earth in some respect for a while.
Oh, well, when I suddenly saw them in the costumes, I thought of Twentica.
Well, and when I was thinking about the structural things, where it's just a bit unbalanced because all the stuff with the larger ensemble comes in later, it sort of reminded me of how a different time period entirely and different structure, but how Tika to Ride in Red Dwarf is actually really well structured in the way that it deals with going through and playing with the history and going back into it in a way that maybe I'd like to seen something here in that strand. But again, very, very different stories, different time periods, different subject matter. But there's something there, something with the structure. But I mean, you said before it's a game of two halves. I mean, I argue that it's maybe a game of one quarter and then another 3 quarters, because all the stuff with Data on his own does feel pretty different from everything else that comes later.
That's where I do think it loses people. You know, we've probably been very negative, but I do really like this. It's just I do think that is where people watch this and expect something different. And certainly, I've already mentioned it, but there's the future story that we'll come to, Birthright. That does the exact same thing as this. It's just the other 3 quarters are not so good.
Yeah. No, absolutely don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoyed this as on its own terms as a knockabout romp. But I would be lying if I said I can tell you what happens in the first episode and I remember the second episode just as well. Because I don't. As soon as the first episode gets to the point of the crew coming back into it and then going to explore the caves and leading up to the end, from that point on, my recollection of it is far less good than everything that happened prior to that.
What happened to the end? How did they defeat the aliens? I genuinely kind of like... I feel like that's gone from my mind completely.
I was genuinely hoping that you would tell me. Because...
Well, what it ends up coming down to is Picard needs to get the information to the future that the way that they're going to destroy the cave is wrong. So he needs to hide the message in Data's head, and that kind of closes the time loop. And that's really the only interesting... Well, that's harsh. It's not the only interesting thing in part 2, but it's the only thing that...
Plot heavy.
It's the only thing that feels inventive over what you can already imagine is going to happen from episode 1.
Yeah, and I feel there's like quite a lot of time in the cave. Like episode 1 and episode 2, it's like that. The final scene with Jack London in the hotel, it feels very much like, well, that's part 1 over. I'm saying who I am and what the reference is, and then I'm out of here. And it feels like, yeah, that's part 1 over, even though it's in part 2. And then, here's a lot of boring stuff where we're in a cave. You get one set piece with a horse. Clemens in the future, and it's just like, well, what is that? Why bother? And I get it's kind of like, we need to swap them at the end, but it doesn't really do a lot. You don't really get much out of it. You've had that kind of people from the past on the Enterprise, or even aliens who have no knowledge of this technology on the Enterprise, and that sense of wonder. And this is just kind of like, okay.
Yeah, it's perhaps especially noticeable because prior to that, the usage of him is different in terms of having someone that realizes what's going on, realizes that they're coming back from the future, and is appalled. Well, not appalled by it, but is in awe at it, sees it as a threat. That's something different. I can't think of another episode where we've kind of gone in that direction before.
It's only the episode where the man from the future comes to the Enterprise, really. It's the closest.
And then that's the opposite way around. Because in this one, we're obviously having someone that's against the crew. Not fully against, but it gives a different dynamic there. But yeah, the minute that you take him out of the past, that changes that dynamic quite a bit.
I feel like if this episode was structured different, it could have had a better cliffhanger. Like, Samuel Clemens arriving in the future would have been a much more interesting cliffhanger. I mean, even just not ending it on a cave, having them arrive in the future, seeing them walk onto the street in the past in their Starfleet uniforms, that would have been a much better visual to end the season on.
Or even playing on the plot element, moving up that part of Clemens realizing what's going on by eavesdropping. If you play that slightly differently to make it more of a sort of dramatic cliffhanger as to everything's going to go wrong, there's something interesting there. It feels like there's a few jumping off points that you could use as a cliffhanger, which makes it all the more bizarre to finish where it does.
This is the beginning. This is the origin story of Picard and Guinan, provided you ignore Star Trek Picard Season 2, which may or may not happen in the same timeline, except it definitely does, but it doesn't make any sense because she doesn't remember him as younger, played by a different actor, and I don't know it. I'm still annoyed that she had a bar called 10 Forward on Earth in the 21st century. It makes no damn sense. Yeah, that 10 Forward, that's just two words that she thinks pretty cool. Oh no, it's on Forward Avenue. Yeah, of course it is. Like, that's fine. And then she insists on having a bar on deck 10, forward section of a starship. That's perfectly normal.
She'd gone through so many starships before she settled on the Enterprise. None of them had a bar with exactly the right name. I will not settle until I find a starship that can be directly tied to the name of somewhere I've previously bartended.
I'm sure I've read something about how Tenfold is actually on deck 9.
Well, there you go.
Or like the design of the ship, it could only have been on that deck. Might be wrong there, but maybe that's the writers of Star Trek Picard actually analysing the show in detail and fixing that little mistake.
But I guess I wanted to talk about Picard and Guinan here before I got slightly sidetracked. He obviously stays with her when she gets injured. Is it enough? I just don't really feel that they do the thing where it's like, well, I'm looking forward to meeting you in 400 years. It just doesn't feel like it sells it enough to me. And I guess it's a life or death situation, but it also just feels a little bit, okay, this is the secret to this deep friendship, which is closer than family. I wanted more from it, I guess, which may not be possible in the confines of this production.
Well, it's that thing, isn't it, where they need to write something because it's built up in episode 1. And they just put enough in to justify it.
Ultimately, it's on a bit of a hiding to nothing, isn't it? I mean, we already said, coming after the prior 2 stories, having something that is a light bit of fluff, for the most part, will suffer in comparison. It doesn't mean there's anything inherently wrong with it. This is just always what happens. Whatever follows in the wake of something particularly standout always suffers in comparison.
And in many ways, it's the right thing to do.
Oh, yeah.
2 emotionally heavy stories. You want a bit of fluff. It's just, unfortunately, it's fallen at the end of the season.
Yeah. And going back to those Back to the Future comparisons earlier, it's almost like straddling the 2 seasons with part 2 of those films and part 3. But the thing that works there is the changed setting, not changed premise. There's very little changed premise between those films, but you know what I mean. It's different. It does that Doctor Who trick that part 2 is in some way, when it starts out, different from where you've left things at the end of part 1. Whereas with this, part 1 enjoyable enough fluff, part 2 feels like just keeping the wheels in motion. Although you've got the rest of the crew coming in, it doesn't really feel like we're doing anything particularly different.
What it does absolutely fine. But if you are looking for more, if you are looking for depth, if you are looking for some big character moments and something memorable, I imagine like if this one was in Voyager, people would think it was really good. But like, we are in a very strong run of TNG episodes, and there are weaknesses. I will acknowledge the weaknesses. The ideas do not really come together. The villain is very weak, but I think it looks very nice, and there's some good costumes, and fun, a few laughs, like Data playing poker, Data speaking French. What's not to like about that?
And Voyager did kind of do something very similar to this with Future's End. Fun Romp, which was a time travel story to the past.
Picard Season 2 did the same, where everything's miserable.
Less successful.
Fun romp to the past, where you must confront your mother's mental health issues and your father's violence. But Seven steals a car, and the punk from Star Trek 4's there. That was fun, everyone, wasn't it? Less fun than the episodes. Yeah, you're right. It was quite a tedious podcast. But we're going to talk a little bit more in a place that we call Quickfire, where we read things out of up to 3 books and websites. So here we go.
Quickfire.
Joe Minoski commented that the episode was a bit of a mess, but I was happy with the Mark Twain stuff. Okay. Ronald D. Moore, he regretted that more wasn't done with the 1890s period and felt that Twain's involvement was too perfunctory. So, contrasting views. To take that sort of historical figure, put him on the starship for an episode, felt it should be more than just one walk through the corridor of Troy. Unfortunately, there was so much stories to tell, and these of the show forced you into really moving that into a sidebar and just playing a scene here and there. And that's exactly it. They kind of bit off more than they could chew. Too many elements.
Still, I'm guessing that he was happy that one of the shops was named after him in the background of the shot.
Mark Alamo gives his last TNG performance as the card shark Frederick LaRue, and he would go on to play Ducat not long after this in the pilot episode Emissary, and he'd go on to play that role for all 7 seasons. One of the best characters in Star Trek.
In some fun continuity, in Booby Trap, Guinan tells Georgie LaForge she's attracted to bald men because long ago one was very kind to her, and in Ensign Rowe, she said about a time she was in serious trouble, but a man helped her out of it. Both references are seen here, when Picard saves her life in the 19th century. See, if you're very vague about stuff, then it can be a reference.
Was Booby Trap the one with those aliens where they want Geordie to help them make the engine go?
Yeah, I think it might have been.
I like that one.
The Packleads.
Who doesn't like the Packleads? Did they end up becoming like a villain in Lower Decks?
They did. Yeah, they were sort of recurring bad guys. The staff found breaking this story quite difficult. Jerry Taylor said, "This one was a nightmare. It was just awful to kind of get the story going. Even when we finally went to script, we kept changing the story, so it was a matter of going back and wrenching out sections and restructuring and plugging in other things and then taking all away. Probably the most troubled episode of the year." Rennie H. Bavaria said, "We basically boxed ourselves into a corner with part 1, and it prompted a very hilarious arguments about time travel and how it worked. That's not how time travel works, you idiot, with curious accusations and people following back on primary sources like Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. That's the way it works. You can go and meet yourself, and all sorts of preposterous stuff."
Turning once again to the dull diatribes of the Nitpicker's Guide, I think this is one of the more boring entries, but I'll read it in full for the full effect. Picard sends a message to Data by tapping on the back of his head with a metal file. After Data comes to life, he says, "Torpedoes, phasing, alien," and tells LaForge that he is processing a binary message from Picard. A binary message? Binary uses only 2 numbers, 0 and 1. It is ideally suited to computers because it relates to an electrical signal of off equaling 0 and on equaling 1. Let's suppose Picard sent only 3 words, torpedoes, phasing, and alien. I realise that these 3 words don't make much sense by themselves, and Picard must have sent additional clarifying words for Data to get the gist of the message, but for the sake of the argument, let's just say that he didn't. There are 21 characters in these 3 words. Adding 2 spaces to separate the words brings the grand total to 23. If Picard uses standard ASCII codes to represent these characters, each character would contain 8 binary digits, also called bits, and this means that Picard would have to tap a series of 184 ones and zeros to relate the message. Just for the record, the string of ones and zeros would be as follows: 011101000011, and I'm not continuing with any of the rest of this boring bollocks because it goes on for ages. But just to give a review of what I think of this entry in Phil's book. Phil, I think your book is 01000001, 011101101100111001110101 01101101100. Thanks.
I just want to nitpick you there. It's actually it's pronounced ASCII code, and of course Robert Llewellyn and Red Dwarf pronounced the ASC2 code. But quite embarrassing for everyone. Yeah, sorry.
That is the nitpicker's guide to first contact there.
I do like at the beginning of episode 1, they do specifically point out that it's not Law's head. And there's a line, I can't remember the exact line, but Data says something like, "Oh, my head uses a phase R variance and Law uses a phase L variance." And then Picard replies, "phase L." And then that's the end of that discussion. They just move on. We've confirmed Law is not involved. That's the end of it.
I was just amused by the line here. Hardin had not played Mark Twain before and was simply cast for his general physical type. I don't know, that just amused me. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
Jerry Hardin, he would play Deep Throat in the X-Files, but he's another guy who's been in absolutely everything, including Sliders and Lois and Clark and Quantum Leap, and he would also appear as Neria in Star Trek Voyager Season 1 in the episode Emanations, which we all liked. Samuel Clemens reappears in Lower Decks. People go on the holodeck and pretend to be Samuel Clemens to settle their arguments because speaking in his voice helps you put your point across. That might not sound like it makes sense, but it's good in context.
Am I right in remembering that he'd never played Samuel Clemens before, but then he ended up touring as Samuel Clemens?
That's the next line of what I just read. It said that he was so enamored with the part that he took on a one-man touring show.
Do you think he actually thought that Samuel Clemens was transported to the future and then went back to the past?
I mean, it'd be interesting if you went to that show with no knowledge of Star Trek and then he just suddenly, and then I went into the space and there was this man and his head came off.
Oh, and someone will write in if we don't mention a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. There you go. There's a time slip reference to Samuel Clemens. Have you read it? Have you? I've not. Well, that's us done. Welcome to Season 6, everybody. We will be back again with another episode soon enough covering Realm of Fear. We hope you will join us then. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.